Well, good morning. It's hard to imagine that the first 1 month has gone already. And, I am very pleased to have been here with you. So today I've been asked to talk about nursing and the power to influence, the power that nurses have in the influencing process. So that's our topic today. But first and foremost, I like to acknowledge where I come from. I travelled from Swinburne University of Technology in Australia, and that university rests upon the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. They are part of the oldest civilization on Earth, and it is their lands on which the university is built. And we have our campuses in Melbourne's east and outer east. And so we like to express our thanks and acknowledgement to the people of the Kulin Nation and their elders who have been in the past, their ancestors, those that are present, and I'm always pleased those that are emerging, the young elders and the young leaders that are amongst us, and also the Swinburne leaders who supported my visit to come here. I also express thanks to the University of Parma and to Dr. Antonio Bonasaro and his team, yourselves, for all the hard work that you've done in supporting my visit, and things like securing visas and all those things that were a bit complicated, but hey, we got there in the end. Yes, yeah. So a little bit about me for those of you that haven't been here before. I was born in a place called Whakatane in New Zealand, which is in the North Island. There's 2 islands you'll see there. It's in the north. But I also gained Australian citizenship in 2009. So I'm also a Kiwi and an Aussie, both. Have the 2 citizenships. So I've got 2 daughters and 4 grandsons, which is a great blessing. I'm a New Zealand registered nurse and midwife, and I've made a commitment to lifelong learning. So over the years, I've been able to do further qualifications, etc. I've worked and taught nationally, internationally in health, education, social services across that broad spectrum, and in a number of countries: Australia, New Zealand, Middle East, Africa, Asia, and the UK. And I'm now what they call a Professor of Health Workforce Development, Nursing and Health Workforce Development, and I have a special interest in helping nurses grow and reach the best of their potential and increase their scope of practice, and partnership-based services, interprofessional education, and regional development and capacity building. Those are the areas in which I do research. So, for better or for worse, in 2000 and around 2018, I decided I was convinced to do a second PhD. I already had a doctorate, but I was convinced to do a second one. And I did that with Professor Deborah Jackson at Oxford Brookes University. And the thesis was about nurses and health service leadership and the power of nurses to influence. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that today. So first of all, it's important to get a few definitions right. So what is policy and what is influence, and what is this thing called influences that nurses have? So first of all, a policy refers to plans, ideas, guidelines that have been formally agreed to by a nation. Like there can be a national policy on immigration, there could be a national policy on housing, etc. The professions, so professions have policies around what is required to be a registered nurse. Service providers, the hospital has policies, and policy development is a complex, non-linear process. You don't start here and that. It's something that evolves all the time, and it's influenced by policy influences research, personal opinion, and also political viewpoints. Because every time you have an election, everybody puts out their policies and they have their viewpoints and their political views. And so it's not this simple, clean process. It's about that. But influence is basically the ability to enact change, to change results, to influence and change beliefs and change behaviours. That's what influence is. So as a nurse, for example, you may influence your patient to adopt a better lifestyle, more healthy lifestyle. As a politician, you may influence a nation to pay nurses better. Wouldn't that be nice? Yes. So that's the difference between policy and influence. The policy is what the thing is, and the influence is your capacity to be able to enact that change. So what kind of things do nurses do that are policy influencing activities? What are some examples? They're things like when you advocate for your patient needs, you're influencing what happens in terms of you, say, for example, something as simple as somebody has broken their leg and been sent home, but you advocate for the fact that you can't send them home without a wheelchair, or they can't send them home without crutches. So you are influencing the outcome, so advocating for your patients and the things your patients need. Translating research into best practice. So there might be something on your ward that you're doing about infection control or things like that, but you've actually read some articles that are best practice, that there's a better way of doing it, a better way for wound care. So you may be influencing that. Influencing policy at the ward level around all patients have to be discharged by 10 o'clock. But hey, nobody can come and get them till 11 o'clock, so they sit downstairs, like things that happen in the ward, and collaborating with other policy makers. So you may be collaborating with somebody at the nursing council level. So nurses, when you think about it, sometimes we think nurses are powerless, but we are not. There's at least 23 million worldwide. Some numbers say 29 million. And in most countries, they are at least 50%, sometimes more than 50% of the health workforce. And they're closest to the point of care. Nurses are closest to the patients than any other profession. They're trusted professionals. I don't know, sometimes you see the global kind of surveys that who is the most trusted profession? Nurses. Who is the least trusted politician? Car salesmen and politicians. But nurses are always right up there. And empowered, well-educated nurses are needed to address health challenges, improve the quality of life in communities and nations. And when I think about where your country is at and where your university is at, now for the first time next year, formally, the nursing program will be led by a nurse, right? So little steps in policy influence. Better conditions, you have master's programs now here, so ability for your nurses to expand their scope of practice, increase their influence in what they do. So creating change. If you're going to be effective in your leadership, effective leaders have multiple ways of doing this. They don't just try the one thing to influence others and effect change. And collaborative, people-orientated mechanisms yield better results in health and social change. So that means if you work with others, you get better results. In Africa, they have a proverb that says, to go fast, you go alone. To go further, you go together. Right? So if you work in teams, so if you are just one voice, whereas you can convince others of that idea and others' idea, and then there's 20 nurses that want something to happen on a ward or something, the collaborative mechanisms in health and social services are a better way of going about things. So these are some things that I found in my thesis of having a look at it. So if you look at yourself and what are the personal attributes, and we think that, in some ways, influencing policy and influencing anything, we influence what happens in our families, we influence what happens in our communities, on our everywhere really, is that what is it that we do that is the influence? What are all those things? And there's lots. It's about being authentic. If people can't trust you, or they think that you tell lies, or you are not authentic, you don't influence anything. It's about, and Tony and I talked to the first year students about that personal values of who you are. Being clear and focused in what you're trying to influence. So if you go on and on and on and on, people can't get the point, and they're not quite sure what it is that you're trying to change. So it's about that clarity of focus, right? Being relational in orientation. If you are combative and always picking fights with everybody rather than focused on being relational, you don't get very far either. having a common purpose. So it's about, you've heard that old saying about having a win-win, right? So, and I went to the UK first in 2000, the year 2000, and they were putting all the leaders and all the nurse leaders and all the CEOs and all the board members through common purpose training, right? If you want to convince somebody of something, it has to be beneficial for them too. So that common purpose. You've got to be really good and persistent at overcoming the barriers and resistance. If you give up, I'm sure in your country you have that saying that says Rome wasn't built in a day. I'm sure you've heard that. Sometimes you can't get at it and at it and at it. Sometimes it might take 1 month, sometimes it might take one year, sometimes it might take 5 years. Be passionate and confident about it. Like, people have to gain the sense of it that you actually care about it. If you're not very passionate about it and you don't care, they'll say, oh, it doesn't really matter to them very much. Thoroughly prepared. So if you're going to go to, say your students are going to come to you and say, we think we should have 3 assessments in this course instead of 4, right? If they come once and say that, if these students have worked together as a group, have a paper, have something that shows that they're going to be just as good in terms of your assessment, that you're going to be just as confident that they're competent and that they have more time to learn, and if they are thoroughly prepared, or if you are thoroughly prepared, you are more likely to influence and needs to be culturally aligned, right? If you're trying to change something and it's either against the organisational or the national culture, it's very difficult. And it empowers others. It's not just about you, It's actually enables others to have more power and more voice and more autonomy. You're likely to then. So those are the personal attributes. And it's funny in terms of kind of like, often those of us that are good at influencing and good at creating change, we don't actually know that those are all the things we do. But when you actually broke it down, and part of my thesis was breaking it down and said, how do you describe these attributes? What makes a person who's influential good at being influential? Who are they and what are they like and what skills do they use and how would you describe them? These are the kind of things. And sometimes, if you are thinking, I'm not getting anywhere on something, I've been saying it and they are not listening, it's always good to step back and look at something like that and say, okay, what am I doing? Am I really clear and focused about my message, right? Or have I established some common purpose here? What is getting in the way of a successful outcome? Am I properly prepared? Have I got the evidence? Am I convincing? What have I done? So it's always a bit of a wee model that you can sit back and say, I'm not getting what I want. What it is about me that I could change or do differently. And then this is looking at it from a slightly different in terms of what are the actual mechanisms, what are the things that you do. The other slide was what about you as a person? These are what are the things, right? So you build, we start on the right and go around, you purposely build social and political capital. So if someone's going to stand for mayor, they go out and do enough, they talk to people, they actually build the political capital of those that are going to be with them on this journey, right? They make sure that they completely manage any potential conflict of interest. So if people think it's just about your personal agenda, like for example, you want the rules about dogs changed, but you've got 3 dogs that bark all night. So they think that you've got a personal agenda, so they don't take any notice of you. So it's really important that you have managed the potential conflicts of interest, that you're good and that you work on multidisciplinary partnerships. So if you want to change some things for nurses here, right, it's really good that you've got built capital amongst the nurses. But do you know what? You need quite a few doctors on your side as well. And you need administrators on your side as well. You actually need the multi-party things. Collaboration across boundaries, and those are often professional boundaries. Sometimes they're legislative boundaries sometimes. So you actually have to stop and make sure you're not operating in a siloed ability. Continuous messaging. If you basically have a bit of go at it and then you're quiet for a month, and then, oh yeah, there was that thing I was trying to do. So people are successful, they continually, you know. So if, for example, you want more gowns for graduation, okay, right, and you only mention it to the director once every 6 months, but if you bump into them and say, I'm still working on that issue about gowns for things, you know, I've got some costings for it. And then the next time you said it, I've actually got 3 costings and it's not too bad. Would you like to see them? It's about, otherwise they think that, well, you're not really serious about that. And there is occasionally that people actually will give you what you want just so that you'll go away. You know, like they're sick of it. You know, there is occasionally, there is that balance between annoying people, but also being not active enough that you don't get heard. There's a balance in the middle there somewhere. Again, cultural alignment, the clear vision and purpose. And you actually have to have a planned strategy about how we're going to go about this, right? So if, for example, you're going to get more grounds for graduation because then you can have bigger graduations, then it doesn't take you all week, etc., then you basically sit down and say, okay, to be thoroughly prepared to present our case, what do we need? We need to actually say 7 sessions versus 10 versus 12. That's this much time, this much tutor hours. These many classes can't be taught. This is research that can't be done. And this is the tutor time and salary that it costs for this versus this, right? So you do a little business case and then you say, well, we need someone in our team to have actually gone out the cost of the ground functions. These are what it costs. So that's been thoroughly prepared, and that's your plan strategy in terms of that you have a plan, that you've put it together, that when you go to convince somebody and then they say, well, what about this or what about this? Oh, yes, we thought of that. Oh my God, this and this. It's about being prepared. Right, the barriers and the resistance, right? There's always those, always lots of barriers and resistance, right? So first of all, you've got to build trust, right? If people don't trust you, if they think that you are difficult to work with, that you are combative, that you're not, that you might try and mislead them to get what you want, that you're not transparent, trust is difficult to build and really easy to lose. And you're way back at base 0 and square 1 if you break trust. Right? So trust is really important. Right? You've got to be convincing, right? Because when you're trying to influence in something, you are impacting beliefs and values, and you are impacting. You're trying to get resources sometimes, right? And there's a pot of gold that's got, I don't know, €100 in it, and you want it, right? But so do 5 other people want it for something that they want. Right? So it's about being convincing, being politically astute, right? So I'm just trying to think of an example of being politically astute. If your boss knows, if you know that your boss gets very irritated if you don't go directly to him and you go to 3 other people and don't tell him what he feels undermined, right? You don't do that, right? If your boss says, what are you coming to me for? Have you presented this first to my top team and are they convinced? You do that, right? So being politically astute is figuring out how your boss or the money person that's got the money bag or the policy advisors, what do they like? What makes them feel threatened? What makes them feel undermined? What is the way that they like to operate? That's what you play to, right? It's about being called politically astute, knowing which way the wind blows, right? Yeah. Persistent, you don't give up. You do secure buy-in. You have to have, this is back to that whole thing about go alone, you go fast, but go with others, you go further, you get better results. You have to have professional courage. Some days you're going to go and you'll walk away with tail between your legs and you've had your ears boxed. Oh well. Very influenced by the leadership side. Remember, the first definitions, it's around politics. Influence is also about politics. It's not just process. It is political. Little politics, big politics, right? If you want something done in the admin office downstairs, right, you need to know who to go to, who to ask, who to annoy, who not to annoy. And that admin office will be different from another admin office. You just need to sort out over time how it works, right? And as I say, the professional courage, sometimes you get beat up, right? And sometimes, like, even for nurses to stand up, over the centuries, it has taken courage to actually go against the flow sometimes and to have that voice and speak out. And it takes courage to lead, in which case it's always good to have a mentor and some wise ears in the background where you can say, well, today was a beat-up day. I need to, have a coffee and stare at the ceiling. I need to do something. I need somebody to talk to, and then I try again the next day. You need to be a polished negotiator. You need to go to good negotiation, right? About what you'll give and what you won't. But in negotiation, you need to know what is your bottom line. If you have convinced 10 other people of your idea, but you can't take the 10 to the meeting, and you agreed on what you want, and then you go into the meeting, and then you cave and give in on things, and then you walk out and say, oh, sorry, I said that we'd do so-and-so. Well, then you've lost your support. Okay, so, yeah, that'd be like buying a house, Antonio, like negotiating. Yes, yeah. And resilience, because there's little in life that doesn't have some barriers and resistance sometimes. I even think of my visa going here in terms of we probably used all of those things around there, didn't we, Antonio, to get it done in the end. And that's the way it is. So that thing about leadership in terms of it's got many facets to it, and I quite like some of these kind of word maps that show this. So then if we move the conversation slightly to how do you lead with nurses within the profession? What can you do in that respect? What is your leadership role there? And some people say, well, I'm not or charge nurse. Have you ever heard, I'm just a nurse? Yeah, I'm just a nurse. But my message is consistently, there's leadership opportunities for all nurses at all levels. And they're all saying about leadership from the ward to the board, right? So right from the ward level at the patient bedside, right up until if you're on the board of directors of the hospital. Every nurse can be a leader. Preceptors, educators, mentors, role models, researcher, policy influence, and also, as we said before, as your advocate for your patient. All of that requires leadership skills. And no matter what your role in the practice of nursing professional development, you belong and you have a leadership role. Every day you step into your workplace, you are leading in some ways, whether it's as a preceptor, a super user, skills validator, clinical champion, mentors, professional development associate, and academic partners. As you grow in your profession, there are many ways that you lead. And leadership in nursing requires the power of the whole 23 million, not just someone in the WHO and someone in ICU. It is every nurse at every level on a daily basis. And that is an extraordinary force to be reckoned with, really. So here's a paper that I was written recently about, so some of the things that you can lead is simply about writing policy briefs. So in New Zealand, we've had a shortage of nurses, right? And so the government opened the borders and lowered some of the requirements for entry, and suddenly bingo, 48%, nearly half of our nursing workforce in New Zealand are internationally qualified. They're not domestically qualified nurses. And about 25% of those come from Kerala and the Punjab in India and Sri Lanka, and so Central Asian nurses, and about 15% of them come from the Philippines, right? But all of a sudden, you've got, and my own daughter had gone and decided to change profession and do graduate entry nursing. She arrives in the ward on the morning, and all of the nurses on the ward are from Sri Lanka and India, and they're speaking Tagala and Hindi. And then all of a sudden, halfway through the thing, we better speak English because our student nurse doesn't understand us. So here they are in New Zealand, English-speaking country, right? And then all of a sudden in the hospitals, the patient complaints have tripled and quadrupled. And they're nearly all about language, like, I'm trying to talk to the nurse and she doesn't understand me properly, or my elderly father is a bit deaf, and while they're caring for him and washing him, they talk over the top in Hindi. He doesn't know what they're saying. Is he talking about them? When they laugh, are they laughing at him? He does not know. So what happened was, one of the chief nurses of our biggest district health board, she wrote a policy that said English only. All nurses at work can only speak English, right? So suddenly there was a big furore in the country. 20, 30, 50 news headlines, English only policies, English only policies are racist. You're being racist to these people. This is unacceptable. So Deborah Jackson, who is in charge of the journal, she's the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Advanced Nursing, she wrote and she said to me, will you write a policy paper, a policy discursive, a discussion on English-only policies and the allegations of racism in nursing? And we did that. And we basically said the important things is patient safety, culture, and respect prevail. So that paper, if you want to read the paper, so we looked at things from a number of things. But first of all, if a group of nurses are just by themselves in the tea room, yeah, they can speak their own language, right? Hey, if they have an English colleague with them, it's kind of disrespectful to spend the whole lunchtime as a team and not, Yeah, otherwise, why did that person come? They might as well be by themselves, right? The same in the ward. So the issue is that then if you look straight down the lens of safety, patient safety, can you imagine, and we had done some work in the Middle East with Dawn Kozemski in previous papers about that, a critical incident with a cardiac arrest, the anaesthetist is Syrian, the surgeon that's called in, the trauma surgeon, is Pakistani. The nurse assistant is Egyptian. Some of the nursing team are English from Canada, right? You've got a critical event of which you need to have somebody calling the shots. And in the time of stress, everybody reverts to their native tongue. It's like the Tower of Babel. So there is lots and lots of papers in the literature that says, and there's some in Taiwan and Japan, and also some in China, that says when people speak different languages during a critical incident, the adverse outcomes quadruple, right? Because people make mistakes, they don't understand what's being said, right? So then I got to thinking about this and thinking, okay, if you really think about this as an issue of patient safety, right? Where else in the world, let's sometimes, one of those things about influencing, going beyond borders. So let's go right outside of nursing. Let's go beyond borders and think about this. So the first thing that came to mind, and you'll read it if you read this paper, is the issue of airlines. Do you know you cannot fly an international aircraft unless you have very, very stringent English requirements? Can you imagine somebody flying from Russia into the US and they don't understand what the Qatar's saying, right? Not only that, is that when they've done some analysis of aircraft mistakes, is that the issue of accent. Not only do you have to be a pilot and a tech crew and on the things, your English standard requirements. So there is the English of the skies, they call it, right? And that is now nearly 100 years old, right? And not only that, there is a really stringent requirement. If you cannot moderate your accent and pass the accent, you cannot speak, because again, if they can't understand your accent, you are in difficulties. So there was that example. I then went to the sea. So there is the English is the language of the sea. Again, if you are coming into port, or you're by a lighthouse, or you have safety of cargo or oil spills or crashing your ship, if you cannot, so English again is the universal language. And most ports, if the captain and the crew cannot speak English in terms of those that are guiding that vessel, it cannot be. So then I start to look at business. So some of the big businesses like Google, some of the other ones I looked at, some of the paper, some of the car manufacturers. So they have a factory in Japan, and they have an office in Germany, and they have some in Switzerland and things. What they found was that when these companies were using their own language, to then send something to Germany, they had to translate, and then went to Switzerland and translate. So the costs were extraordinary, and the translation errors were bad. So again, increasingly, English is becoming universal. I then went to a country that is not English speaking, that is Taiwan, right? So Taiwan is increasingly having medical tourism. So people go there to have all kinds of procedures and surgeries because it's cheaper. So they are now requiring their Taiwanese nurses to speak English to support the medical tourism. So there was lots of examples. I then went and did a search of all the countries in the world. So the Americans sorted this under the Constitution a year ago, because there is the issue of human rights, right? So human rights to speak the language I want to speak. So, and you know, the American Constitution is very strong on human rights, but they have a special law that's been there for 20 or 30 years that they practice, that you can impose the requirement to speak another language in 3 circumstances, and they all relate to safety, to patient safety, the aircraft, the patient safety, etc. And it's embedded in law so that it aligns with, this is the Constitution. So, you know, like, I can't come along and say, I'm now head of nursing here, and in your office every day, stop speaking Italian, you just speak English, right? That is a breach of human rights, right? But as soon as there are patient safety, so these are kind of, that's an example of a policy paper that I did recently. I just published it about January this year, right? And it arose out of that thing in terms of, so still some of the unions and some of them are like some of the Indian community who are not, you know, the families, they're still complaining that it's racist, right? To get them to saying you must. So then the other thing is patient respect, right? Like, and culture. If you really, really want to care for an Italian patient or a Maori patient or an Indian patient or a Chinese patient, or when you're in the Middle East. So in the Middle East, I could be a nurse. I can take the blood pressure, right? I can change the dressing. I can put up the IV. But can I sit down with a Bedouin lady and talk to her about sexuality and the fact that she's going to have one of her breasts removed? I cannot, because I cannot speak her language, right? So therapeutic engagement requires culture and respect. Right? So there are the issues of safety. So again, like right back to the beginning of this talk, policy is not a linear process. It is complex, right? But when you make a policy, you have to try and sort that complexity and say what absolutely matters. So the thing that absolutely matters here, first up, is patient safety. So wherever patient safety is involved, no bones about it, right? Patient culture and respect, you do not. Like, can you imagine if I'm bathing an elderly Italian person and me and my colleague, we just speak English over the top of them all the time? How disrespectful that is. They feel vulnerable, they're naked, they're in a bed, you're washing them, and you speak another language and you laugh amongst themselves. They get all kinds of things in their head of, what are you laughing at? Do they think I'm ugly? Do they think I'm fat? Are they talking about me? And most of the time they're not. It's just, so it's that respect. But then it's also the fact that we have an increasing population of Indians in New Zealand. So Indian nurses who can relate to Indian patients is a good thing. So it's all about, as I say, not necessarily an easy answer, but it's sorting what the policies actually mean. So then there's the ability for nurses to lead through research. And again, like I say to all nurses, start with something small, right? Write about the quality improvement that you can do in your classroom or clinical specialty. Read an article for your local journal club. Some innovations in teaching, learning, or patient care. Start with small things rather than straight into a large randomised controlled trial. And we did a previous presentation about research capacity in school. Nobody expects you to be Einstein from the beginning. Yeah. It's many nurses making. And in your writing and publishing, select the right partners, co-authors and someone to review and provide feedback. Prepare and focus your topic. Choosing your publication venue from. You start with just your newsletter, your board newsletter. Start with a newsletter for your department. Write something, submit it. Writing's practice, basically. But we talked a lot the other day about selecting the right partner. You want someone, if you're going to write something together, that also, if it's a small piece, you just need a mentor or a colleague to review it, and you do the writing. When you start doing your first research and first article, you don't want someone that gets you to do all the work and then they just sit there. You want someone that actually helps work with you. And choosing a partner, it's really important. Someone you can trust and who you can work with. You don't want it to be a fight all the time and an argument about it. But also someone that trusts enough in terms of, like, most times, like when people that work with me, they get it back and it's got a few red track changes in it. That's quite hard because you spend a lot of hours and sweat and tears trying to get those words right, and then someone's put red lines on those. So you've got to get past that, all right? But someone who'll give you good feedback and help edit your work, right? And part of being a writer is there was one of the Charles Dickens or somebody that was said in that last book, why did you have 29 versions of the last chapter? He says, I was just getting the words right. And someone who has the skills to help you learn and grow. And educators, in terms of, another place about, influence and policy, you can utilise classroom-based action research to promote high performance in teaching and learning. So you're influencing the quality of what's happening, and action research allows systematic investigation and effectiveness of new teaching methods like classroom environment, instructional resources, instructional techniques, student engagement, simulation, classroom management, instructional methods, assessment and grading, lots and lots of things that you can, and Tony and I and others are going to look at the issue of the exchange experience for students. We're having these exchange experience and the students seem to be having fun, but does it work? Did it change anything? Has their thinking about their cultural competencies changed? It's an expensive endeavour. Why do you do it? Is this a good thing? So there's lots and lots of ways that you can lead an impact. Talked again about researching various health service practices. There's lots of things there about avoiding hospital errors, good hospital design techniques, choosing data for quality improvements. The list is endless of things that might interest you. So the other thing is that whatever it is that you choose, you have to have that passion for it. If it's bored, you don't like it, you don't want to do it, it's got to be something that really interests you. Write for journals, expand literature and an evidence base for patient care, and you are contributing. Again, you're influencing your profession, right? The piece of policy paper about English language policies, I could have written that and we could have sent it to the chief nurse that was in trouble at her hospital saying this might help. But by publishing it, it's globally available for others that might get into the same difficulty. And with the migration of nurses everywhere, it is a big issue as to what language should be spoken. Choosing a journal. Who will read it? How long to get published? So the publication lag, that was commissioned by Deborah Jackson. So I think it was out and published within 5 weeks because the editor-in-chief wanted it. It was timely, it was hot, it was, yeah. And what type of articles? There's lots and lots of types of things that you can start with. Even simple letters to the editor. Everything helps your writing skills. Using social media. That's another really way that you can combine research but writing influence and policy influence about what's happening on. ResearchGate, LinkedIn publication, your citation tracking, all of that influences your impact as a nurse educator, as a nurse researcher. There's a few resources there that you might want to look. There's a few good books that have been floating around that we use a lot for our students. Anatomy of Writing for Publication, Just the Facts books about action research, evidence-based practice. It's more about anatomy of writing for nurses, and it's often hailed as the most comprehensive up-to-date book for nurse writing. And this book asserts that you have a professional obligation, not just to other nurses, but to the public at large, to share your experience and for advancing healthcare and patient outcomes. Evidence-based practice, there's some there that's actually about what that book is about. And so we use these in our nursing programs down under quite a lot, these particular texts. It's a book that's quite good too about teachers as researchers, students as researchers, and just students do theses. Yeah. Classroom research, things that you can research in your classroom, which is everything, as I say, from your assessment techniques to your teaching techniques, what works, what doesn't, online nursing, online classrooms. That slide should have been vanished, that slide. It's just a template thing, I can take that out. Nurses Making Policy is a really good book too. Some resource that you find. And as I say, from the bedside to the boardroom, from the ward to the board is another thing that is often said. Pretty recent publications. That's it. So that was just a little presentation today about nurses and the power to influence. So many of these skills, we have them already, we just don't recognise them in ourselves. But also having these little models I've found useful for when things are going wrong, saying, which of those particular things around that circle should I place a bit more focus on? And also some acceptance that sometimes influence and policy take time, and just sometimes you don't win it all, and that winning at all costs is not worth it. Influencing is about taking other people with you and getting good outcomes that benefit everybody, particularly those that you serve, like your students, your patients, your community.
Thank you so much, Sharon, for your presentation. I think it was full of insights, and it's a source of inspiration. And getting to know your story is really moving. And can I just ask you a question?
Yes.
You know that the University of Parma, you know the environment now. You've been here for quite a while. What do you think would be the key point, the key goal, or the key action you could make, let's say, put in place to change the situation? But do you think that there's something we could do which is strategically spendable, to make the system move on?
So first of all, I think that you need to recognise it's been here for 1,000 years, and so the change won't be fast. But there are things that you can do to move on, to accelerate it. My view was always that the best tool is success, right? And productivity. So nurses take over leadership of the school. In 5 years, it's pretty much like it always was. You have nurses, they come, they go, they graduate, what is different? So you really need to focus about that point of difference. If suddenly things like your media hits, it's just social media stuff, you can pay attention to that, but there has to be substance behind that, right? If suddenly your team is really, really research active and the outputs and the metrics are coming up in respect to that, and people say, wow, look at those nurses, how did that happen? Right? So if in 2 years, 5 years, 7 years time, the outputs and the things are demonstrably different now that it's under nursing leadership, people say, wow, look at those nurses. These things take time, they take effort, they take time to build. And it is also something as simple as in your corridor out there, getting a big notice board behind a glass panel, and putting all the publications up, and growing the publications and having them very visible. And every time you get a publication, putting them out on LinkedIn, being able to say on your annual basis, last year we had, across our team, 7 peer-reviewed papers. Now we have 12, now we have 15, now we have 20. That before, previously, our students write our thesis and go, right? Now, 5%, 10%, 15% of our nursing students, our top nursing students, after graduation, we work with them and we publish off the thesis. Right? Those are the measurable impacts that start to have, the win-win thing, right? If this university, and I don't know a university that doesn't value research outputs, right? They all do. It's part of their ranking, their rating, so that's the win for them. The win for nurses is that the work we do, the perspectives we have, the research inquiries are much more visible. For us, it's about nursing and nursing position in the world. The win-win is that for the university, and then basically it's kind of like if in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, there's absolutely no difference, still the status quo of how things were always done. Well, why is it led by a nurse versus led by a doctor? Like that, that's how universities think, like and set their mind. So your question was, how do you make a difference? You've seen a university here that, yes, in some ways it's very progressive, in some ways it's like when I trained. So the important thing is to make a difference, you have to have hold of something that is in your control. If it is not in your control to do it, you are banging your head on trying to influence and maybe winning it and maybe not winning it. And, it's kind of like you can keep knocking on the door and saying, we want more power, we want more recognition, versus saying, We've just got more power, we've got more recognition, we've got nursing being led by a nurse, we've got it. So what are you going to do with it? Yeah. So what are you going to do with it? What are you going to show it with as a team? How as a team are you going to actually say, we nurses are a major contributor to this university. We punch at weight, and then in time to come, we punch against our weight, above our weight. And some of those ways of increasing your research outputs is, as I say, starting small. Every single person having a target of doing small things, working with your students, but also on time, the things about going beyond borders and collaborating. This week, I had the privilege of meeting Prof. Stefano from University of Milan. Expand the networks, right? Do joint collaborations, increase the publications, visibly show you publication outputs and the impact that you're doing. And the other thing is that we had a session about student-led nurse care clinics and services, right? And about community screening, right? Can you imagine if out in the front row there, and the road out there, if you've got permission that, I don't know, when is it busiest out there with people going by? Once a month, twice a month, twice a month, you had all your students out there and doing community health screening, blood pressures, HB1AC, blood sugars, etc., etc. And then you've got a bit of media involvement or a bit of. The thing about is to do some things that are different from what you're doing now, to do things within your direct control that you can control, and to not pick too many things at once. Don't make your effort into confusing. If it's about increasing research inputs, it's about increasing the visibility of your students. Those are two things. If you just achieve those and people could say, wow, we never saw this before, that's what will make a difference. And some things are quick and some things are, yeah. And the other things I say is this always going to be where you have your offices upstairs here?
Yeah,
yeah. Decorate the walls. Put a big thin cloth. Say on a notice board. You know, we want a big long task cabinet, like from there to there, right along, as long as that board. And every time you get a paper, you put them up there. Get a pin and put it up. And when they say, you know, when you go to that nursing department, this is what you see. Because it's you can know about the publications, but sometimes it's also like visually putting them out there as well. You know, like for visitors. Little things.
Yeah. I think they know as much as me what has been happening since I arrived, and it seems to me that many of the things you are saying have been already part of the strategy. So it seems to me that slowly we are building up our visibility and credibility in the university. I think we are constantly publishing, everything we are doing on social media, on the university website, on the department website. That part of the building that was given to us. We are trying to introduce all the updates and the news you are suggesting us to changing the environment. But sometimes you come out with all the strange rules and regulations that are in place.
Yeah, all those barriers, all those
Yes. So sometimes you have to give up to avoid and prevent conflicts, and sometimes you just try not to pay that much attention, and you just do it. Hoping that no one is going to complain about it, and nobody.
Forgiveness is better than permission.
Yes, and now we are just waiting to have 2 more offices allocated to us, because we are trying to start a couple of new initiatives, and we were really inspired by the students-led clinic. So we were talking about this opportunity of setting up a students-led clinic in an area of the city which is quite depressed,
yes,
with lots of social issues.
Yes.
And this could be a very good idea, a very good service to offer, especially to illegal migrants, because they're gonna have a GP, they don't have no one to go to, and sometimes they don't even go to the emergency room or to the emergency department because they will be rejected, or they feel, they perceive themselves as at risk of being, deported. And
So the thing about that is that there's many things that you can do, like for the elderly falls prevention, but the pre-diabetes testing, the community health screening, that's easy. You then find that people will start turning up that they haven't got a GP, they want a script, they want things, they're things that are outside the scope of nursing. So we turned our clinic into professional clinic too. So that's where you can go beyond your border and beyond your boundaries. And then if this is going well for a while with the community screening, and then you say, look, we're actually finding people want these, then you go and talk to your counterparts in medicine and say, can we have some med students down there with us as well?
Yes.
And can we work together, And then we can broaden the range of services. So it's things like that, and it's starting small, and it's also you celebrate the small successes, but also be really realistic that in terms of you've got to look after yourself as nurses, and the time you have to have a life yourself, and that also transformative change is visible over time, and that when you come back in 5 years and 10 years, that's the transformative change. Be realistic about what you want to achieve. Choose no more than 4 projects, right? Because otherwise you burn yourself out. You make your effort like confetti. Small grains of rice that just scattered like the wind, and makes little impact, and the bird can just pick it quick and it's gone. So you have something that's meaningful and cohesive. And the thing in terms of the thing that you get fun out of doing and that you enjoy, it's got to bring kind of passion to your professional life. Yeah.